We're here taking a break from the One-Shot Derby to do a commercial sponsored by Lucky Strikes and also the creator of Brindlewood Bay, Jason Cordova. How do you feel like the war effort's going, Jason?
You know, we are barely keeping it together. The Western Front... The Western Front is currently on fire, but us here in the central part of the battle zone are doing our best. So
luckily, we can send the United States' greatest resource, older women, to fix all of our problems.
Exactly, precisely. Yeah.
Listen, this is me putting a little bit of my hand on the scale of how much I am enjoying reading over. I haven't recorded the Brindlewood Bay episode yet because I wanted to come in fresh when we're doing it, but this is going to be out of order. But like, this is me putting a little bit of my hand on the scale from how much I'm falling in love with Brindlewood Bay.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So I told you a little bit about the One-Shot Derby, but I'm actually really excited about the fact that you've laid out the first episode in the TV sense, but also like your first game session as being so character driven. What is important to you as a character designer to have the formalized character creation session laid out that you're going to do all of this stuff before you even get into your first mystery?
So my thing when it comes to role-playing games is I think I really want players to get to start playing as quickly as possible, right? And so I tend to play games and run games that have pretty light character creation, and so you can kind of get straight to it pretty quickly. But that can also be a little unsatisfying because sometimes you play these like lighter games and you don't really feel like you have a lot of scaffolding for what you should be doing, like when you start playing, right? Yeah. I know you all have played Fiasco, for example, and I love Fiasco, but I consider Fiasco to be a very, very hard game to get into. After you make characters, to start playing is kind of tricky because you don't always know what to do, right?
The funny thing is we haven't played the game of Fiasco yet. We've only done the character creation twice, both in the previous One-Shot Derby and this one, so that's interesting to say.
I find it to be tricky
for sure
to begin because Fiasco doesn't really tell you like, okay, now here's what you do, right? And so my games, I've always done this like structured session one procedure because I think it's a good opportunity to kind of just get everybody onboarded really well into this world, who the characters are, what you're meant to be doing. It gives the keeper, what we call the GM in Brindlewood Bay, it gives the keeper a chance to sort of be on stage and be in the spotlight, but like in a low stakes kind of way, you know? So there's like scripted bits they read, you know, and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, to me, it's all about like getting to play as quickly as possible while still doing your due diligence in terms of like establishing the world, establishing who these characters are. It's a balance, right? I personally don't love to like do hours and hours of character creation. I like to do a character creation that's relatively thorough, but then gets me into playing, right? So that's kind of my thing.
You've touched on something that I think is what I find so powerful is that you are making character creation into play. That's what I like so much about the first session layout that you have is that you need to, because Powered by the Apocalypse has these playbooks or this playbook style where it's like circle this, circle this, circle this. We're actually playing the character creation together, which is why it works so well for what we're doing for the One-Shot Derby and why I've been enjoying it so much.
Well, yeah. So Brindlewood Bay has this thing too, where I think this is something that you're going to like, where you basically like you kind of introduce your character, right? Your murder maven, these women who are in this book club in New England, right? You introduce your character, and then based off everything that the other players know about your character up to that point, the other players get to say something that they think can be found in your character's house, right? And so straight away, before dice have even hit the table or any like actual like, you know, play has started to happen, you're already kind of thinking about the other characters. You're kind of forced to engage with the other players and their character, and you get to kind of like put your own little stamp on someone else's character, which is really fun, you know? And then those things that can be found in your house are functionally your equipment list in the game, right? Like these are the items that you can use to modify your die rolls once play starts. And so, yeah, you're right. Like I'm really big into like, how can we make like, how can we like already start playing the game, right? Like, let's just go ahead and start doing fun things right away, right? Not just bookkeeping, you know?
Thank you for reminding me that it was set in New England, because my Maven will have had sex with Larry Bird a lot. I'm just like, I'm putting that in my brain. There's a lot of 1980s Larry Bird memorabilia, and no one talks about it.
Just a whole lot, like really rare, valuable stuff. Right?
Yeah. So as a game designer myself, I gravitate towards games where form follows function, where the structure of the game is facilitating the type of story you want to tell. I think especially in a post Dungeons and Dragons telling everyone else that they are the tabletop RPG and everyone else is an indie tabletop RPG. I'm like, I don't agree with that setting, but it is kind of this landscape that they've laid out for us. Every other tabletop RPG is like, okay, what is the exact type of story I'm going to tell with this game set? And I find that Brindlewood Bay is doing an incredible job of this. I mean, I love Masks because it is telling exactly the story of being a teenage superhero. You cannot be an adult superhero. You cannot be a child superhero. You can only be a teen. And we are telling a story which is Golden Girls meets Twin Peaks.
Essentially, yeah.
Can you walk me through where the mechanics that you were putting together to tell this specific type of story? Like what were you pulling from and thinking about to facilitate this all happening?
Well, so I come from a part of the hobby and industry that is very, very focused on, I guess, what I would call like genre emulation, right? Like when we think about Powered by the Apocalypse games, like, which is to say games derived from Apocalypse World, and and Masks is one of those, right? When we think about games like that, like genre emulation is a big, big part of it. Like, it's like, okay, I'm creating a rule set to create this really particular, to emulate this really particular genre, right? So Masks, it's this idea of like a Young Avengers style comic book team up or whatever, right? Apocalypse World, it's like we're doing post-apocalyptic, science fiction, right? And fantasy.
Like play out Fallout right now.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And so my games go kind of one step further, and it's not just, it's like really, really hyper specific genre emulation, right? So in Brindlewood Bay, we are playing a group of elderly women who are solving murder mysteries in their town, a la Murder, She Wrote. And they're a group of women kind of like in Golden Girls. And also there's a Lovecraftian conspiracy behind all the murders, right? So it's really, really specific. And, but what I've kind of taken from like all my years in the hobby and kind of playing games that really, really focus on genre emulation is the mechanics you want are the ones that give you those big fictional swings, right? Like in my games and in the games, a lot of the games that I enjoy playing, you're not rolling dice to determine like, okay, I hit, okay, great, I'm gonna roll again to hit again. Okay, now you roll dice to hit me. Like, it's very granular, right? And it's all about swinging swords, and it's about like really granular moments in the fiction. The games I play, when you roll dice, you're resolving like a whole scene, right? Like, we're rolling dice to see this entire scene resolved, right? In Brindlewood Bay specifically, we are maybe rolling dice to see, okay, you've searched this whole room. We're going to roll dice to see what you found, right? We're not going to roll every little time you open a door, right? So to me, at a broad level, I like to, the way I emulate genre, the way I emulate my really particular story that my game does, is to make sure that the dice and the mechanics are operating at kind of like a higher level, right? Like in terms of like how much fiction is done in one die roll, right? So I think that's a big part of it.
I mean, like a TV, the way you're describing it, I'm like, oh, like a TV writer, like a writer's room,
right? Yeah. It's really cinematic. Yeah, it's very, very writer's room, very cinematic. And I think a lot of people throw around this idea of like, a lot of people kind of scoff, or they get too wrapped up in this notion of like cinematic role-playing gameplay, right?
Absolutely.
But there really is something to it, right? To me, when you make a game that is more cinematic in nature, you're making a game where at a mechanical level, you're resolving bigger amounts of fiction, right? Like, you're telling more of the story when you roll the dice, right? Like, you're kind of talking and you're kind of saying what your character's doing, and then when they do something that triggers a move, i.e. triggers the mechanics, or in other words, triggers the mechanics, then you roll dice to see how this whole scene resolves, right? And I think that's kind of the thing. It's all about like it's about storytelling at kind of a slightly bigger, more dramatic level, right? As opposed to like very, very fine, granular, simulationist, if you will, like kind of concerns. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the story we're telling, our America's greatest underused resource, are old ladies, I should say older women, considering how all of the women in Golden Girls were like actually 45 to 55.
Yeah. Well, Estelle Getty, right, was the youngest of the four, right? And she was presented as the oldest, right? So
incredible. So tell me more about why you wanted to tell a Golden Girls / Murder, She Wrote inspired thing. You wrote about it in the larger version. I've looked at both the 32-page version and the 168-page version. Shout out to Kickstarter. Shout out to everyone who promoted that. Right, yeah. But you wrote about why older women and why should you want to keep your character to be an older woman. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple different reasons. I mean, when I finally started writing Brindlewood Bay, and there were different reasons why I even started working on the game to begin with, but once I was kind of in the middle of it, writing a sort of like a game that uses what at the time, and I think to some degree still, is a very unique and novel mystery system, I began thinking about the characters that you're going to play. And when someone threw out the idea of like, oh, no one's ever really done a Murder, She Wrote role-playing game, I was like, oh yeah, that's great. I love Murder, She Wrote. And then like somebody said, what about Murder, She Wrote in Cthulhu? I was like, ah, it's so amazing. Let's do that. Yeah. And so when I started kind of writing that, it became really clear to me that the fact that you were playing older women was actually a really important part of the experience for me. And I've had people like in the past, because, Brindlewood Bay has been out in some form or fashion for about 4 years now. And I've had people say, well, what if we want to play like men, younger men, or we want to play like, we want to play younger women, or we want to play different types of people. And I'm like, well, I guess you can do that. I mean, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to go to your house and slap the book out of your hand and tell you can't do that, right?
You paid $12 for the PDF. I can't do that.
I can't do that, yeah. But I will tell you, my point of view as the game's creator is that I want you playing older women because we don't often get to see older women characters in this kind of environment, kind of being badasses, like in a kind of fantasy science fiction kind of setting, right? We don't often get to see these characters as whole people, right? Like a lot of times, like older women or aunties or your grannies or whatever are usually kind of caricatures in media. Like they're not like presented as like whole people. Like the murder mavens in Brindlewood Bay, these elderly women who are in this book club, they have very complicated, messy lives, right? Like they're real people. And I think that was a big part of it for me. It's like, well, yeah, you can change I suppose if you want to try to play something different in Brindlewood Bay, I guess you could do that. I mean, obviously other role-playing games, that's you're presented with like so much possibility, like, oh, you could play anything, right? That's what the promise of the hobby, right? But that's not my promise. My promise is this game is going to work really, really well if you play older women in this book club, right? And so, yeah, you could do that, but I think you're missing out on something. You're missing out on like having a slightly different experience of seeing like a story being told from like a different point of view and kind of experiencing someone else's like, to some degree, like lived experience. Right. So there's a sort of empathy component to it as well, I suppose. Yeah.
It's funny that we were comparing like Fiasco and Brindlewood Bay here, only because we're both doing them on the one-shot derby, but I'm thinking about the fact that Fiasco is so relatively old. It is like 10, 15 years old, and I think about, we played Inspectors in the first one-shot derby, which is also a very...
Love Inspectors.
Love that game, and it's like, you think about Inspectors in the same way you think about the real world as it being so original at the time, and then you're like, oh, I need to remember that like so much has iterated on top of that. Yeah, and now it's true. Like Brindlewood Bay is doing a similar thing that Fiasco does. Fiasco, you are telling a Coen Brothers movie, but you are zooming in even further into I want to tell Murder, She Wrote meets Twin Peaks. Like that is something that it's almost it is postmodernism. It is the moving forward of media, and then how are you expressing that through gameplay? And it's like, no, I want to tell this specific story. I was also thinking about, you just said that, and I'm like, well, you could do one like 20-something-year-old boy and 3 older women, like that Steven Soderbergh movie that came out.
Oh, which one is that? I don't think I know that
It
one.
was on it's called Let Them All Talk. That came out relatively recently. It was like in his new streaming era. But I'm doing the same thing where I'm reaching for a movie recreation through a postmodern tabletop RPG here.
Right, yeah.
Thanks for listening to me to say all that. I just had to get that out to another person who thinks about tabletop RPGs. You're a podcast guy and you're an actual play guy as well. And I'm very interested in game designers who also are actual play people, seeing what games are being turned into in this new media setup. How have you seen Brindlewood Bay as a vehicle for recorded storytelling, either through your own creation or what you've seen reflected back to you?
Yeah, I mean, my podcasting stuff is mostly discussion podcasts, but I do actual plays as well, and I appear on other people's, streams and actual play podcasts, and I have my own YouTube channel as well. So like it all kind of, I do a lot of it. I think Brindlewood Bay, and indeed all the games I make, I think they're like really well suited to actual play, actually, because I think in actual play, what you want big, cool moments, right? I think what's interesting in an actual play is, everyone always talks about the classic D&D session where we didn't pick up dice once, right? Like people say that, right? And the way I look at it is, okay, what if you picked up dice and every now and then, and every time you did, something really, really cool happened, right? Like that's kind of my feeling on it. But also my games have, and Brindlewood Bay is one of them, has like built into it lots of like moments where the players get to be part of the world building, right? So it's not just the GM who's doing all the world building, who's doing all the describing, Yeah. Because that's just how I like to run games, right? And so, for example, whenever the Murder Mavens enter a new space, there's this the keeper will present what's called a paint the scene question, right? And a paint the scene question is a question that you ask about this location, and it's provided to the keeper. You pose this question, and in the answering of that question, you sort of explore what the place looks like, but also what something else, some idea about the place, right? So one of the very first paint the scene questions you'll probably do in Brindlewood Bay is you'll kind of get on board this yacht of this rich family, right? And the paint the scene question is, what do you see? Looking around, what do you see that shows these people have more money than they know what to do with,
nice.
Right? And so everyone gets to think about that. Everyone gets to say their fun thing, their cool thing, and everyone's kind of super engaged, right? It's not just like one person saying, here's what's happening. It's everyone kind of talking and laughing and building the world, right? And so the games have lots of stuff like that built into them, where it's all about like kind of guided storytelling and like prompts that kind of get you engaged in the storytelling, and it's not just rolling dice, right? And so I guess like in that sense, I think they're really, really good for actual play. And again, going back to what I was talking about earlier about like the mechanics resolving bigger bits of fiction, like when you do the day or night move, which is kind of the basic conflict resolution mechanic in the game, when you do that, either you or the keeper are then responsible for narrating the whole scene. So it's you get to like narrate something really cool. Sometimes you have to do like a flashback for your character. And so that's an opportunity when you're doing a flashback to sort of be in the spotlight, and you get to really tell us something cool about your character, right? And so, yeah, my games have a lot of like, it's in my circles, it's referred to as narrative tech, right? Like it's game tech, but it's very narrative focused. It's not like hard crunch focused, right? It's well considered game tech, but very much focused on telling story, right? And so in the sense that like what we're all kind of doing in this hobby is collaborative storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And I would like to think that my games are really, really finely tuned for collaborative storytelling and show off this style like really, really well. The mystery solving, right? Like the mystery solving is very, very cool. And when it happens on a stream or whatever, it's very fun because everyone is getting to, because the way it works is the solutions to these murder mysteries are not predetermined, right? Like you're going to find clues, and then you're going to have a discussion as a group of players about who you think did it. Like who do you think did the murder, And just that discussion alone is really engaging, right? And really entertaining. And it's not just the keeper saying, you got it right. No, it's like, we're going to sit here and actually do deduction right now. And we're going to try to figure out what's going on, right? So yeah, I guess in the sense that like, my games are all about like kind of collaborative storytelling and really very engaged storytelling. I think that makes them great for AP.
Absolutely. There's some stuff in terms of your narrative tech. I really like how you said that. It's like the game mechanics to tell a good story. There's a lot of, and in a way that there are anti-lock breaks. You have anti-winner mechanics. Like the thing that I always say now is like people aren't trying to win tabletop RPGs in the way how they're trying to beat their dungeon master. Like especially in an AP, they're trying to be the weirdest and wackiest and quote unquote
cool.
most unhinged. And were you thinking about like were you consuming and thinking about actual play before you wrote Brindlewood Bay? Because I felt a lot of like things that leaned towards not only collaborative storytelling, as all tabletop RPGs do, but collaborative storytelling that gets put into a microphone or video and then shown to others.
Yeah, there's a spotlighting effect in my games, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a moment where you get to clearly be in the spotlight, right? And that's important. No, I wasn't thinking about AP. But what I was thinking about is so my company and community that I come from is called the Gauntlet, and the Gauntlet is an online entity, right? We're all about online play. And so we developed a lot of the really like early tools that people still use to this day to like ease and improve online role playing, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I was creating Brindlewood Bay and then the follow-up game, The Between, and other games, I very much had like my like online play in mind, right?
Sure.
And like what makes online play easier and what smooths it and what makes it better. And indeed what makes it not a compromise, like what makes it actually like a really like desirable way to play role-playing games, right? And so I think a lot of those things though also are good for AP. So it just kind of turned out to be a nice happenstance. But then in recent years, like in the last couple of years especially, I have thought a lot about AP as I make my games. Like I do think about like, well, what would be cool to see? Because as I've done more streams myself, as I've done more actual play myself, I'm naturally kind of thinking about it, right? And so one of the things that we've discovered, I ran a campaign of my game The Between last year on live stream.
Yeah,
it's the first time I'd run a full campaign on live stream, and one of the things I didn't realize was so fun was getting chat involved in that.
Especially, and just to clarify, the In-Between has a similar mystery mechanic.
The Between has a similar mystery mechanic. Yeah, it's about monster hunters in Victorian era London, though. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And but it has a lot of the same stuff that Brindlewood Bay does. They are two games very much in conversation with one another. But anyway, the live stream was fun because what I didn't realize was how fun chat would be. So a lot of the times when you're asking one of those paint the scene questions, like what do you see that makes you feel this or see that or whatever.
Oh, I love that.
You can also get chat involved, right? And let chat answer those questions too. Or maybe if the characters find a clue for the mystery, you can ask chat, well, what do you think they find? Like, or what do you think it means? Or, you know, that kind of thing. You can get chat involved in the mystery solving, right? And so that's something I've been really recently more conscious of, like this idea that particularly on live stream, like chat can be a lot of fun to play with, right? But even like recorded, edited APs, I think there's something to be said about a game that kind of gives you a chance to sort of really shine, like it frequently gives you a chance as a player, an individual player, to spotlight and to be like, have your cool moment, right?
You're saying the thing you said about chat, as it's relevant to how we put out podcast episodes, we're usually like 2 or 3 episodes ahead. But if I was in a longer campaign, I would then people would write in to me or to our Patreon or to hit me on social and be like, oh, I think this is going to happen. I was like, well, that is how I think the children of Persephone are. You're right. I'm going to steal that, exactly, and it's going to be a part of me now. I love that. Yeah. Can you tell me your favorite Maven move that you have?
Oh, sure.
There are so many, and they're all inspired by different characters throughout 70s, 80s, and 90s TV and mystery novels. Tell me about some of your favorite moves, because there's so many, and I want to choose all of them. But like, which are your favorite, or which have you seen created the most amount of like fun moments?
Oh, sure, yeah. So the some of the moves are very they're kind of like really like just pure advantages, hard mechanical advantages, and those can be fun depending on how you're playing the game. But the ones that I tend to gravitate toward, especially if I'm getting to play like a longer campaign and get to really like kind of go deep with it, there are moves that there's one, for example, called Fox Mulder, and in that one, in between these mysteries that your murder mavens are solving, there is this occult conspiracy that connects it all. And if you have the Fox Mulder move, there's like a secret faceless, shadowy person who's helping you, right? And so in between mysteries, they're kind of like helping you out and like kind of giving and as the campaign progresses, you can kind of explore your relationship with that weird character. There's another move called Dale Cooper, which is a la Twin Peaks. Your murder maven has like dreams. They have these like weird dreams. And so you have this weird dream at the beginning of a session, and then the events of that dream can have an effect on what goes on when you're investigating the mystery, right? And that's always, as a keeper, and I'm almost always the keeper, that's really fun to role play. Like I just like doing that. It's a lot of fun.
I knew those are your two favorites because you had to make a note saying you can't have both in your party. I'm like, I knew he was going to say this.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work if they're in the same campaign. You have to kind of like pick one or the other, but that's one of the few restrictions as far as that goes. There's another move called Gordon Shumway, which is Alf, right?
Yeah.
And that gives your murder maven like a really cool cat, like that is like well trained or at least like can do small tasks, right? Sure. And of course that's a that's a joke of mine because Gordon Shumway of course eats cats.
Of course.
But I thought that was kind of fun. There's a whole other set of moves that are based off literary figures that was part of the Kickstarter, and that's a different set of moves that you play instead of the ones that are based off TV guys. And those are a lot of fun too. There's one in particular that is sort of it's kind of like Silence of the Lambs. Like after you have like after you've helped capture a murderer in future sessions, you can go to where they're being held in prison and like consult with them, and then that relationship can become kind of weird between the Maven and them. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun writing the Maven moves. They're all like, they're your best opportunity to sort of make your murder maven like mechanically distinct from the other murder mavens, right?
I find it so interesting that like by doing a PBTA game, you don't have a playbook, you just have this murder maven move, and yet but it is so relatively powerful and distinct. It is a playbook. It feels almost like a playbook on itself. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in game design. I'm a big believer in designing as much as is needed, right, to accomplish the story that you're trying to do, to accomplish the game that you're trying to do. And when I decided against playbooks for murder mavens, and instead went with like a common character sheet augmented by moves, because in my mind, what was more important is it was more important to me how the characters are all the same, right? And they are all the same in a lot of ways. They're all elderly women. They're all in this murder mystery book club. They all have like a little hobby that they do apart from mystery books. And they all have dead partners. They're all retired, living in this town of Brindlewood Bay. So the things that make them really, really similar are very, very important. And so it was enough to just have like a character sheet that's the same between all of them. But they do have their own little, talents and peculiarities. And so they do have like their moves, which kind of help distinguish them from the other murder mavens, and as well as some things you get to pick, on the sheet. But in general, that's kind of the way, that was like the right solution for this story, right? Whereas in the Between is more playbook based, because what is important about those characters is how they're different, right? They are all really, really different kinds of people who are thrown together, not against their will, but they probably wouldn't normally hang out if not for the fact that they're doing this work that they're doing in the game. And so, yeah, that was sort of my thinking there. It's like, a character sheet is enough here.
Well, I mean, Sherlock Holmes and Watson are not one move away from each other, while the Golden Girls are all very similar and have one distinct move. For
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Golden Girls, like, they have their own distinct personalities, but they have a lot of stuff in common, right? And that, like, and the reason and the things they have in common are why they're together, and it's why we care about them.
Exactly. Jason, I am putting my finger a little bit on the scale from how much I want to play out a game of Brindlewood Bay, but can you make your pitch to our audience to vote for this game for us to take it from character creation to playing stage?
Well, one thing that's nice is Brindlewood Bay works really great as a one shot, and so you should be able to do a whole mystery, which is great. You'll get a really really good sense of how the game works, and you'll also get a really nice contained story. In a lot of one shots, especially for games that aren't designed to be one shots, you might have like a feeling of, well, I didn't really feel like we got the whole story, right? You can do a one shot of Brindlewood Bay and have like a nice, complete, tidy ending, which I think is nice. I think the game has a really unique mystery system and it has that aforementioned narrative tech. It's going to be a lot of stuff I promise you've never seen before. And so just from a sort of like, oh, this is kind of cool and new, that's a great reason to want them to do it, just to have to see a different way role-playing games can be. I myself am a thinker in role-playing games. I've been deeply involved in the hobby for a long, long time, and I've put a lot of my sensibility and my knowledge, I've baked it really deeply into Brindlewood Bay, and I think when a lot of people play it for the first time or see it played for the first time, they have this thought of like, wow, this feels really different. Like this feels like something genuinely different in the hobby that we haven't seen before.
Oh, for sure.
And so I think that's a great reason to vote for it, because it's nice to experience new things. So, do new things. Yeah, and it's just a good time. It depending on how your keeper runs it, it could be a very scary game. It has the potential to be quite a scary game. It's not just, a cozy mystery game, but it can also just be quite cozy as well. You can do it both ways. You have some variability there. I like a mix. When I run it, it's kind of a mix of kind of funny and cozy and even lighthearted, but then like occasionally punctured with horror, like the horror kind of occasionally creeps in and kind of gets you. And if you play a campaign, you really get that, right? If you play a campaign, the horror builds and builds and builds, right? So I'm a horror gamer. So if you like horror stuff, I think it's a good choice there too.
The tension of a horror gamer making a Golden Girls style game really comes through. And
right, yeah.
That's why I've been so excited to bring it to the One Shot Derby, and maybe we'll do a full mystery. But Jason, thank you so much.
This interview once again sponsored by Lucky Strike. Lucky Strike, send some cigarettes over to the 60-year-old woman you know today.